Please rewind this cassette.
Hey guys, welcome to Box Office Addict 85. We're going to be talking about It Chapter 2, or It the Return, or It's, or whatever the fuck you want to call this sequel, this Hollywood cash grab, as I'm going to call it. It's not really a Hollywood cash grab. We knew there was going to be an It Part 2. This is very poetic in a sense, because when Box Office Addict started long time ago, one of the first movies that we covered was the release of the first It. I believe that was one of the first episodes of Box Office Addict, and I broke down why I thought it was so successful. If you don't know, that movie went on to become the highest grossing horror film of all time. It made $327 million domestically and $700 million worldwide. It received pretty positive reviews despite a lot of issues behind the scenes with the leaving of Cary Fukunaga and then director Andy Muschietti coming in and taking over, many script rewrites, Stranger Things coming out and sort of taking the wind out of the premise that they had. They were doing sort of a Goonies Stand By Me thing. But despite all that, the film was still a major success. Skarsgård's performance as Pennywise was widely praised. The kid actors were widely praised. So we're going to talk about the major release that is It Chapter 2, which is not getting nearly the same level of positive reception. The reviews are mixed positive. The movie is 3 hours long, which is much longer than the first film, based off a over 1,000-page book. Stephen King has a cameo in this motherfucker. So we're going to talk about why this movie didn't open as well as the original. We're also going to talk about its overall reception and where horror's at right now in culture and society, because we have seen a slight drop. There was a peak of horror, I'd say, over the last 5 years financially, where all of these horror franchises like The Conjuring or the Annabelle franchise or Insidious, and all sorts of movies would come out, like The Nun, that would make hundreds of millions of dollars, openings we hadn't seen for horror movies, even stuff like Get Out and Us, where this year it's not quite as huge. I mean, Annabelle Comes Home still did decent box office. It still made $225 million worldwide, but and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to act like this opening for It is anything disappointing. I mean, a $91 million opening weekend is huge. And if the first movie had opened with that number, we would still be talking about it. I mean, if it opened at 70 million, that would be huge. You have to balance expectations. This is still an R-rated movie. It's a sequel. It's a 3-hour film. But then the question comes in about word of mouth. Is this going to have the word of mouth of the first film? And I don't think it's going to. And I do think that runtime is going to affect repeat viewing. So I wouldn't expect the 327 mil domestic to be matched with this film. And I also don't think the 700 million worldwide is going to be reached. That doesn't mean that it won't make like 500 million worldwide, because I think that's sort of a lock at this point. But perhaps they misjudged this. I believe this movie could have made $800 million. I don't think $1 billion was ever really possible, but let's update on a few movies that we haven't talked about in a while. Toy Story 4, $1,053 million. It's getting closer and closer to the final total of Toy Story 3, which a lot of people thought it wasn't going to reach. Overall, this ended up being a major success. Critically, $120 million opening weekend, $431 million domestic. It's the third highest grossing film of the franchise, adjusted for ticker price inflation. $1 billion worldwide. Not quite the 1.1, 1.2 people thought it might make. It didn't reach Incredibles 2, or I don't even think it's matched Finding Dory yet. But it's hard to call this a disappointment or a flop when it's made this kind of money. So overall, Toy Story 4, the franchise, continues to be very successful. And then, of course, you have home video. So we'll skip up to Spider-Man, which is still Sony's highest grossing film, $1.1 billion, $1,126 million to be exact. Major hit. Won't reach $400 million domestic, but it doesn't really need to. So who gives a fuck? Angry Birds 2, still doing horrible business, very disappointing. Maybe you shouldn't have made it. The Peanut Butter Falcon, I prefer the Chocolate Falcon myself, starring Shia LaBeouf and Dakota Johnson, is actually doing pretty well, got very good reviews. Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has now passed $300 million worldwide, becoming one of his highest grossing films. Now here's the thing, this film does have a $90 million budget, and I can't imagine with marketing how much they actually have in this movie, at least $150 million. So I don't really know where the profits lie in this. I don't really know what the break-even point was. The 134 mil domestic is fine. I'm sure they were expecting a little bit better, maybe 165 million. It should be able to reach 140 million, and I think 350 million worldwide is certainly possible. It should be able to pass Inglourious Bastards. It will not reach the final total of Django, but it should end up being Quentin's second highest grossing film. But in context, it's really not as successful as Inglourious Bastards or Django. Although I do think it's going to get a slew of Academy Award nominations. And also, it's one of Brad Pitt's highest grossing films in recent years. And it's, continues Leo's track record of recent hits. If you actually see her, this is Brad's biggest movie since World War Z. And for Leo, this is his fifth movie now to make over 100 million at the box office. All of these films were successful. Django, Great Gatsby, Wolf of Wall Street, The Revenant was a huge hit, and now Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So Leo continues to be one of our biggest movie stars, at least in the States. I do think he has international appeal, but he doesn't always make films that, like Inception, that can bring in those international numbers. Overall, though, this movie, is doing fairly well. Granted, a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie should be $300 million worldwide, should be like a guarantee. So this isn't necessarily a surprise. But when you look at the reviews and how this is going to do during award season, I think this is a success for Sony and for Quentin, even if I don't know if it's going to make a major profit. The fact that it made this amount of money in its original movie, if he had been able to make the film for 40 or 50 million dollars, I think we'd be looking at it as a major success. But much like David Fincher, Tarantino makes films for a very high budget that I don't know if they always necessarily require that budget, but they're at a certain pedigree as filmmakers that they get those budgets. At least it's not like Paul Thomas Anderson, where he keeps making movies that don't make any money. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark should be able to pass 100 million worldwide on a $25 million budget, so that's a minor success, certainly not a bomb. Ready or Not, $6 million budget, 39 million worldwide. Honestly, not doing that bad. It did get a wide release, though. The Dora movie continues to be a major disappointment. $49 million budget, $54 million domestic, 82 million worldwide. I don't really think they needed to make this film, and I don't think it's going to kick off the franchise they want. Overcomer, the religious film, $5 million budget, $24 million. Not making nearly the same kind of money as other Christian films like God's Not Dead or that Dennis Quaid movie. Fast and Furious, Hobbs and Shaw, is at 721 million worldwide. I said I think it would end up at about 750 million a few weeks ago. I think that's fair. Once again, the budget on this movie is way too fucking high. This movie should have cost $150 million at the most, because it's a spinoff. They weren't guaranteed $1 billion. Just all sorts of things here. These aren't bad numbers. To open to 60 million and make 700 million worldwide is not a bomb by any means, but they put a lot of money into this movie. I think if they could have been better with the budget, kept it at a smaller scale, this could have been a success. And 800 million worldwide would certainly look better than this. This is actually one of The Rock's highest grossing films. It's right under Fast and Furious 6 and Jumanji, and of course the two big Fast and the Furious films that recently have come out. But it's not a bomb by any means. You look at The Rock, he's at 10 billion, 10.5 billion worldwide. He's still a movie star. Jason Statham, you got to think about him. For a while there, he was stuck in this weird middle ground where he really had the Expendables franchise, and then a lot of his standalone movies weren't really going anywhere. But over the last few years, he's been in Furious 7, Spy. The Meg was a very successful movie, shockingly so. So if you really look at it, Jason Statham has also become a bigger star as time has gone on. I think that domestic total is very disappointing. I'm assuming they hope this would make 250 mil domestic, if not 300 million with that kind of budget. So they were probably assuming this was going to make 850 million to $1 billion worldwide. And I get why they would think that. This is the Fast and Furious film of this year. And it's certainly fast and it's certainly furious. But for David Leitch, or David Leitch, whatever the fuck his name is, He's having quite the career if you think about it. Deadpool 2 and this, both over 700 million. He was one of the original directors on John Wick. Atomic Blonde did 100 million. So he's having a decent career, although I think the guy who stuck with the Chad Swatowski, who stuck with the John Wick franchise, I think you have to give him a little bit more credit. Wait, what's his name? Stahelski? Because you got to think he's really carried on this franchise as its own thing, and it's had a much lower budget, and now the films have done so well. Even though this film cost, I think, $75 million, John Wick, they could probably make 6 or 7 of these movies, even though Keanu is getting older, and it's kind of revitalized Keanu's career. They're making a 4th Matrix now. It doesn't kind of, it's totally revitalized. Bill and Ted 3, I think, is happening because of John Wick. So, I mean, it's really this amazing thing how this has all worked out. But, you know, David went on to become more of the Hollywood filmmaker, and Deadpool 2 was certainly a success. It ended up making more than Deadpool 1 once Deadpool, the PG-13 Once Upon a Deadpool came out, which you'll have to look at the actual numbers to see it updated. But if you go back here, the first Deadpool one. The first Deadpool made $363 million domestically, which was huge, and the budget was much lower. But it made $783 million worldwide, and the big thing was, wow, Deadpool 2 was such a disappointment financially and all that. But really, it did very well. It just made under $800 million. And that franchise, I mean, if every film can make $750 million worldwide, the budgets, as long as they stay in that under $150 million range. Like if Disney makes the next Deadpool movie and they're like, okay, it's going to cost $135 million, they could still have a successful franchise. And I still think it's very possible to make a Deadpool film that makes $1 billion if you have the right villain, or if it's a film where he shares the screen with another superhero character. And there's all sorts of possibilities with that. My hope was always a Spider-Man Deadpool movie, but that's probably not going to happen now. So let's talk about The Lion King, which made $4.3 million, 37% drop, $260 million budget from Jon Favreau. This is a very expensive film. It needed to make $520 million domestic to break even, according to some sources. So it has reached its break-even point at $529 million. And it's made $1.6 billion worldwide. It's hard to say that this film hasn't made a profit. I think because of the cost, it probably didn't make the profit that it would have otherwise. But still, $1.6 billion worldwide, there's no way they didn't make money off this movie. There's no way they didn't make at least $200 million off of this film just from the international gross. So this is a major success. I mean, for Jon Favreau, this is huge. Who kicked off Iron Man. You got to think about it. This guy has Elf under his belt, the first Iron Man. The Jungle Book made right under $1 billion. And here he is with the film that made $1.6 billion. So Jon Favreau's at that point where he can do whatever the fuck he wants. Oh, fuck you. So this is a major moment for Jon Favreau, although this movie was expected to make this kind of money. Really, this is what we thought it would make. I think $2 billion would have been the surprise and would have put it over the top. This is within expectations. Good Boys, the Seth Rogen-produced film, is continuing to do well. It should end up at $75-80 million and should be able to make $100 million worldwide on a $20 million budget, and Jacob Tremblay continues to have a very successful movie career as a young actor. Angel Has Fallen is the third film in the Fallen franchise, starring Gerard Butler. Isn't it weird that he has his own little franchise like this? We'll go back to Olympus Has Fallen, which made $98 million domestic, $170 million worldwide. Didn't do great, from Anton Fuqua. And then you have London Has Fallen, which was not a bomb by any means. $200 million worldwide, did better than the first film, and had a lower budget of $60 million. So here we are with this film, Angel Has Fallen, which looks like it's going to end up close to $65 million, $70 million, with a $40 million budget. The budgets just keep getting lower with these goddamn movies. Like, fuck's sakes, $40 million? Jesus. And we have no international numbers yet. But if this movie can honestly make $180 million, $200 million worldwide, it's hard not to call it a success. Let's see if we missed anything here real quick. Brittany Runs a Marathon, Don't Give a Shit. Aladdin is pretty much over. Secret Life of Pets 2 isn't worth talking about. And I don't give a fuck about any of these other movies. So let's get to the pie. Let's get to the balloons. let's get to that goddamn Pennywise. Let's talk about It, Chapter 2, Electric Boogaloo, starring Jessica Chastain, James McAvoy, Bill Hader, Bill Skarsgård, all the kids from the original movie, including Finn Wolfhard, which is a funny name. It has the original writer and director of the first film. So just for comparison's sake, let's go look at the first It. Let's also look at Mama, which was the breakout film of Muschietti. $15 million budget, $28 million opening weekend, $146 million worldwide. This film was very successful and starred Jessica Chastain and Jamie Lannister. Then let's look at the success of It. It opened to $123 million with a $35 million budget. This film had mad hype. It was one of the most viewed trailers in history. We all knew it was going to open well. The expectations, the projections just kept rising every week. It was like it'll open to $50 million. Now it'll open to $80 million. Now it's going to open to $100 million. It just blew everyone out of the water, or into the sewers, if you will. Critically and financially, and I think Cary Fukunaga had a lot to do with that. I think they used a lot of one of his drafts of his screenplays. And I was way more interested in him making it. I thought he could have made The Shining for this generation. But still, this is probably a film that was more successful than Cary Fukunaga's film would have been. Great cinematography, too. So open to $123 million, made $700 million worldwide, unadjusted for ticket price inflation, which The Exorcist would be the highest grossing horror film. This became the highest grossing horror film of all time, and one of the highest grossing R-rated films of all time. Although in today's world, the R-rated film not opening well isn't really true anymore, because you have Deadpool and you have movies like this. So I think an argument could be made that the R-rated movie is totally back. $91 million. Some people are saying this is a disappointment. It's hard for me to say that. I would say that if this film ends up only making about 200 mil domestic and 450 million worldwide, you could call it a disappointment. But in this current place, it's really not. It didn't open that much lower than the first film. The premise with the children has always been the more marketable point of this story. I mean, that was the part of the original miniseries everyone liked more, and for most fans, that's the part of the book they like more, is the stuff with the kids. So there was always that, and also kids being in danger has more of a horror quality to it. I will say, I think this film could have been bigger. I think the original hype when the first trailer came out, I think this cast, in particular Bill Hader, who's becoming a star, I love that everyone just loves Bill Hader now. James McAvoy's even a movie star after Split and Glass and the X-Men movies. He's at a place right now. This film, I think, could have opened to $120 million. I think it could have made the same money as the original. I think it could have gotten the reviews of the original. I think that they had issues in the scripting stage. The lack of character development, that it is a series of set pieces, that it's, the Avengers Endgame. This really could have been one of the big blockbusters of the year, and I think it did have that kind of help. But I do think the reviews did bring it down. I think the running time brought it down, and I think in general there just wasn't that same sense of excitement to see this character return to the big screen. I think they did a poor job of selling us on, well, why do we want to see the adult Losers Club go through these things? Even though it's cool that Bill Hader does his Jabba the Hutt dying impression, which he had done before on, I believe on Conan or Jimmy Kimmel, one of those fucking shows. Who gives a shit? So $91 million opening weekend. This is a great opening weekend because the movie's budget is only $60 million or $70 million. It did cost more than the first film, but of course it was going to. They're going to pay the adult actors more. They're going to put more money into the special effects. I'm sure the director got a bigger paycheck this time around, as he should. He made a movie that made $700 million. You should pay the motherfucker more. But $185 million worldwide opening, which is huge. They did put a lot into marketing, so I'm assuming they have at least $120 million in this movie. But even if it did only make 200 mil domestic and 500 million worldwide, it's still a successful film. Because it's not like they put $150 million into this movie. They didn't go crazy. A $70 million budget is totally justified for a sequel to a film that made $700 million. it's rather clever of Warner Brothers because they made all of their money with the first film, that they didn't really have to put too much into this, and they knew the profit was going to come no matter what. I'm sure they wanted a film that made $800 million or even more, but they don't care. This is just extra money. This is just extra money they're getting from the first film. So it's pretty much all profit at this point. So yes, even if the film does underperform, or if you can even say that for an R-rated 3-hour sequel, it's still a very financially successful film and still keeps Warner Brothers on the map. They can make a prequel film called Pennywise and spend $50 million on it, or $60 million, and it could make 350 or 400 million worldwide. Other films that have been Stephen King adaptations recently, like Pet Sematary, haven't performed nearly as well as this. So the It franchise is still alive and well. It sucks this couldn't have been a 6-part, 8-part miniseries on a streaming platform like Netflix or Amazon Prime, and I think it would have brought a lot of traffic. But also at the same time, the money Warner Brothers is making, you could have made an argument that they could have made 3 It movies and split the story up into a trilogy. And that might have actually worked better and not had this 3-hour film. You could have had the first film be... Because I think the first film's a little long. I think all films could have been about 2 hours. And you could have had a 6-hour series instead of like a 5.5-hour series. You could have had 6 or 6.5 hours over 3 films. And maybe one film is the kids. The second film is... a mix of the kids and the adults, and then the third film's primarily on the adults figuring out how to defeat Pennywise. But that's just a suggestion. Cary Fukunaga originally envisioned this as a 2-part movie, and for years that's what we heard they were planning on doing. So the reviews are disappointing. A lot of people thought this was going to be as good as the first film, if not better. The trailers did look promising. The cast was very promising. They just missed the mark in a lot of ways, and perhaps that was just the limitations of the source material and trying to adapt it, and also the expectations that were on their shoulders with this after how successful the first film was. Although a lot of people seem to still be liking this movie and pieces of the film quite a bit, but I don't think there's that general love that the first film had. And I didn't even love the first film myself, but in general it was very popular. Still, though, 185 million worldwide, huge opening. Muschietti is still a major director because of this. I'm very happy for Bill Hader to be in a big movie. I'm very happy for James McAvoy. I'm a big fan of both of them. Please watch Barry on HBO. It's great. Bill Hader is just turning into a wonderful Renaissance man himself. Very talented. So this is a fine opening. A little disappointing, just a little bit though. So overall, for Warner Brothers, this is a major release. Let's see, what else did they have? Well, this is from this year. Let's see, what year? Movies by release date. Ugh, fuck this. I'm not going through this. But as you see, Warner Brothers, they had the Harry Potter franchise. This is kind of their, this is their big franchise right now. Outside of, they do have the DC films they're doing well now. Aquaman was a major success, and so was Wonder Woman. So Warner Brothers is one of the only studios with Sony and Universal to still be living in this world of Disney and the mouse. And they have franchises like this for right now. So they're not going anywhere. So say what you want about this movie. A lot of people are mixed on it. Say what you want about this opening. I think a $91 million opening weekend for a movie like this is great. I think for the budget of the film, this is a great opening, and this is still the second best opening for a horror film ever, and horror movies still don't open to these kinds of numbers. As big as The Conjuring, Insidious, the Saw franchise, even The Nun, all of those films that had big openings, nothing compares to this. I mean, $91 million opening, that's terrific, and they're probably already at a break-even point, or they're right under it. $200 million, I'm assuming, was their break-even point on this movie. So, total success. And hopefully this leads to future big movies for Bill Hader. I would like to see Bill Hader play Willy Wonka, personally. And just for me. And I hope that the Xavier Dolan, is he the guy? He's the Old Spice guy. I hope this kicks off the career for all of these actors in new movies, and also shows that horror films can be blockbusters. I think this was maybe too much of a blockbuster and not enough of a horror film. And just like comedy movies, more money doesn't make something funnier, more money doesn't make something scarier. The limitations actually benefit both of those genres. But having said that, I love that we live in a world where people are finally seeing that horror films have merit as blockbusters, which The Exorcist proved in the 70s. Horror films or films within that genre, just like science fiction or fantasy, can be big and you can put money into it and you can have big name actors who play these roles and take them seriously. We can have a certain pedigree, we can have a certain standard. We don't just need these low budget piece of shit horror films with really bad performances from B actors. Not that I don't love a lot of those movies. There is a sophistication and there is something to horror that's underappreciated. And I'm happy when a movie like Us makes $250 million worldwide. And I'm happy when a film like this opens like this, because it warms my heart as a horror fan that we can have large-scale horror films, or we can have Lovecraftian films. Maybe we could get the Del Toro Lovecraft films that we had wanted for so long. We can get adaptations of At the Mountains of Madness. We can get those kinds of movies. We can have cosmic horror. We can have large-scale science fiction horror. We can have fantasy horror. It seems like this is the time to do it. Very Nightmare on Elm Street. Very Nightmare on Elm Street with how he's approached making these new It films. So the hope is that maybe we can get some form of a reboot or a new version of Hellraiser, Candyman, Nightmare on Elm Street. We can go back to supernatural horror and these sort of worlds and the dream state, and they can get the budgets they deserve. Instead of trying to make a $20 million Nightmare on Elm Street, maybe they'll hire a good filmmaker and let him make an $80 million Nightmare on Elm Street film. And that's the kind of world I want to live in. I think that, wouldn't it be great if Peter Jackson did a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, even though he was originally going to do the sixth one? Wouldn't it be great if Del Toro got to make a Lovecraft film? Wouldn't it be great if Clive Barker was actually given a proper budget and could do stuff like Nightbreed again? Or a Hellraiser reboot that actually has the scale that his more epic novels deserve? I'm hoping that's the future we're seeing here. And I thank you to Warner Brothers for doing this, even if I'm not a huge fan of these franchises or a big fan of these movies in particular. I respect what they've added to the movie-going experience. So the story of the week, it has a very good opening weekend. Everything else is doing relatively good. Angel Has Fallen, Good Boys, Lion King, Fast and Furious. There's a lot of movies doing really well right now. We're going to go into a slump here for a little while until we get to the end of the year. But as you see here, Annabelle Comes Home, and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, both doing very well, and then, of course, It. So horror is still very much alive at the box office, and much like superhero films, they're still in the place. And Good Boys also shows that the R-rated comedy still has a place, and you could still make an R-rated comedy that does well as long as you keep the budget relatively low. So right now, R-rated movies are sort of dominating outside of something like The Lion King. And that's really cool right now. Angel Has Fallen is probably a PG-13 movie, all things said. But then you think about that, and then you realize how much money Spider-Man or Captain Marvel or Avengers Endgame made. And it's just like, well, what are you going to do? Yo no sé mañana. I don't know tomorrow. Thank you for watching Box Office Addict. I'll see you for episode 86, whenever the fuck that is. And just leave in the comments what you think about It Chapter 2. What's your opinion on it? And what do you think about this performance and R-rated movies and horror films right now? Do you think they peaked a couple years ago, or do you think this resurgence is going to continue? But thank you for watching. And if you are watching, you're probably a box office addict yourself. And I hope you stay addicted.